Welcome to this reading of How to Be a Teacher at Hogwarts. This book is the rules according to one Albus Dumbledore, myself, as documented by Kerry Woolridge and Dana Christakos. Well, first off, we must admire this wonderful drawing of me. Double-sided even. How fantastic. Well, anyways, these are the rules discussed in this instructional booklet. All rules will be discussed in further detail on their own page. Further, all rules marked with an asterisk have further clauses which are provided later on. Rule number 1. Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws don't matter. Rule number 2. You may take house points from students you don't like. Rule number 3. Ignore bullying as it builds character. Rule number 4. Emotionally scarring students is allowed. Rule number 5. Punishments may be dangerous. Rule number 6. All defense against the dark arts teachers must be evil. Rule number 7. Dueling is forbidden. Rule number 8. Neglectful and dangerous teaching methods are okay. Rule number 9. Torture is an allowed form of teaching. And rule number 10. Murder is okay for Gryffindors, but not Slytherins. But, Professor! Please save all questions for the end, Miss Granger. Now, without further ado, the first rule of teaching at Hogwarts is that Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws don't matter and may be ignored. The exceptions to this rule are those students who further Harry Potter's epic hero adventure. Examples of such characters are Cedric Diggory, whose only importance was traumatizing Harry through his death; Cho Chang, who existed to provide Harry with an early love interest; Luna Lovegood, who was by far the most useful Ravenclaw, helping both with reaching the Ministry, allowing Sirius to be killed, and with the retrieval of Ravenclaw's lost diadem. Finally, there is Justin Finch Fletchley, whose purpose was to call Harry an evil Parselmouth and then be petrified, causing the whole school to hate Harry. But sir, there are plenty more Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws than that. Hannah Abbott, Susan Bones, Anthony Goldstein, Padma Patil! Miss Granger, while these students exist, they are inconsequential unless involved directly in Harry's story. Now, if you could please refrain from interrupting. Rule number 2 of teaching at Hogwarts is that all professors have the right to remove house points or assign detentions to students on any grounds, including purely disliking the students. This is a rule which Severus uses quite often, as shown in this lovely illustration of him removing points from Gryffindor. As well, Severus is the main defender of this rule, though it is often used by other teachers who are mainly prejudiced against Harry. This includes Miss Dolores Umbridge. The third rule of Hogwarts teaching is that professors are to ignore signs of bullying among students, as it is a character-building activity. Students should find their own ways to handle bullying, no matter how extreme, including petrifying, duels, and stealing of people's shoes. The character-building nature of this approach, as well as the effectiveness of this rather helpful poster we have hung around the school, is well evidenced in both young Mr. Longbottom and the young Miss Lovegood, who have turned out as excellent students because they were bullied. Professor Dumbledore! Wasn't Professor Snape bullied? He turned into a bully himself! Miss Granger, Professor Snape is a wonderful person who has my full confidence to teach as he sees fit. Now, if you could refrain from interrupting again, please. Continuing on, rule number 4 is that emotionally scarring students is both allowed and encouraged, for again the reason that it builds character and encourages skill growth. A wonderful example of this can be found in the novel Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, on page 93, in which Professor Snape threatens to feed a possibly poisonous potion to Neville Longbottom's toad, resulting in Neville successfully brewing the potion. As well, emotionally scarring students could also be seen in The Prisoner of Azkaban, potentially in the Boggart scene, as Remus Lupin has no idea any of the students' fears, and could potentially traumatize other students by witnessing their cohort's fears. I was the one that saved Neville's potion and his toad. That had nothing to do with Professor Snape and his teaching methods. Please, stop interrupting Miss Granger, or I will be forced to punish you. Rule number 5 is that punishment of students may be dangerous. Well, we did remove Filch's privileges of hanging students in the dungeons by their thumbs, mostly due to him forgetting students for far too long. Teachers are still allowed to ascribe potentially dangerous detentions. This includes venturing into the Forbidden Forest. The forest should only be avoided when not allowed by sanctioned school events, such as detention. This is despite the fact there are man-eating spiders and mildly murderous centaurs inside. However, professors have the right to decide if the environment could be potentially advantageous to their students, and therefore may send them there despite the danger if they think it would be helpful. Rule number 6 is quite possibly one of the most important rules of teaching at Hogwarts. This rule is that all defense against the dark arts teachers must be evil. If we cannot find an evil teacher, then they must be incompetent or dark creatures. Examples of this from just Harry's time at Hogwarts include Quirinius Quirrell, who was a servant of the Dark Lord, Gilderoy Lockhart, who was incompetent and quite frankly dangerous. Despite the fact his actions may not be considered evil, obliviating and claiming credit for other people's work is still morally grey at best, and therefore he does qualify under this rule. Further, Remus Lupin was a remarkable teacher. However, he was an evil creature of the night. Barty Crouch Jr., in disguise as Mad-Eye Moody, was yet another servant of the Dark Lord. Miss Dolores Umbridge was frankly quite worse than the Dark Lord, which was perfect for her role as defense against the dark arts teacher in Harry's 5th year. And finally, Severus Snape, who, while only faking being a servant of the Dark Lord, was still quite cruel to students and therefore qualified under this rule. Why are you purposefully hiring evil and dangerous people as professors? Miss Granger, I have twice now had to tell you not to interrupt. Please restrain yourself. Anyways, rule number 7 is that dueling among students is forbidden, unless Harry Potter is involved, in which case you are to turn a blind eye. This includes when Harry is endangering other students and nearly killing them with unknown spells. A good example of this is when Harry cast the Sectum Sempra curse against Draco Malfoy, possibly killing him as he did not know what the spell did or its counter curse. However, Draco probably did deserve it. All students should be punished for rule breaking, Professor. That is enough, Miss Granger. If you interrupt again, I will be forced to remove you. Rule number 8 is that neglectful and dangerous methods of teaching are okay. Severus is a great example of this rule in his potions class as well. By allowing students to make mistakes and not actually instructing them, students learn why certain potion ingredients should not be mixed. Despite the fact this sometimes ends in catastrophic explosions, they still learn something from the experience. And no student has yet died in his class, which is quite the achievement. Another excellent lesson in this neglectful teaching method is Remus Lupin's Boggart lesson. While not dangerous, it was neglectful to have all students practice in front of the class, as Lupin had no way of knowing if some students' fears may not be in fact suitable for public discourse. While we claim, no abuse happens at Hogwarts, there is still a chance that some students' greatest fears are their relatives, and while the power of love will help them overcome it, discussing this in front of a crowd was neglectful on Lupin's part. Rule number 9 is that torture is an allowed method of teaching a lesson. While she was worse than the Dark Lord, Dolores Umbridge was a perfect example with this rule and was quite content with it. Evidence of this can be found in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, on both pages 240 and 241. She perfectly used this rule in order to punish Harry for his perceived faults. Furthermore, she did use this torture on many other students, including first years, which greatly taught them the value of listening to your professors, and how to overcome difficulties at Hogwarts. Finally, rule number 10 is that murder is quite acceptable when committed by Gryffindors, but not by Slytherins. When Hagrid was convicted of murdering Miss Myrtle, I more than happily negotiated with the Ministry of Magic to keep Hagrid out of Azkaban and allow him to continue working at Hogwarts. It was my greatest desire to see him thrive, despite the fact he was possibly a murderer. It was probably an accident, and Hagrid deserves the best. However, had I at the time had sufficient information to convict Tom Riddle of the crime of murdering Miss Myrtle, I would have worked tirelessly to ensure he was punished to the fullest extent of the law. He was a dirty Slytherin and deserved nothing better, as proven by the fact he did become the Dark Lord. Now, with that we conclude our reading of Professor Dumbledore. These rules are egregious and wrong in so many ways. Students should not be ignored or treated differently, irrespective of their houses. What is not allowed for Slytherins should not be allowed for Gryffindors either, especially protecting students from murder if they're a Gryffindor. That is beyond wrong, and illegal, and dangerous, and against the rules. And another thing, teachers should not have the power to harm students. They should not have the ability that they do to cause physical damage or mental damage to these students. Dangerous and neglectful teaching should be stopped. Bullying and favoritism should be eradicated, and professors should not be allowed to torture their students. How could you possibly believe that these rules are acceptable guidelines for teachers? Because, Miss Granger, that is simply the way of Hogwarts. Now I shall be forced to assign you a detention for your continued interruptions. I will also be speaking to Professor McGonagall about your behavior. Perhaps, given that you don't understand the rules, you should not be a prefect of Gryffindor. I will be off now, unless you'd care for a lemon drop before I depart. Professor, a detention will change nothing. How can you be okay with these teaching conditions? How can Professor McGonagall be, or Professor Flitwick, or Professor Sprout? They've always tried to vouch for equality and treated all students equally. Professor McGonagall was against Umbridge, and despite the fact she told Harry to keep his head down and ignore that she-devil, there's no way she'd be okay with torture being an acceptable punishment, a regular punishment. Students deserve better, and she believes that. And she may have sent Ron and Harry into the forest, but she also tried to keep most students away and protect them. She tries to help students. She tries to protect them. With these rules, the school is nothing more than a flawed system that fails at educating students and fails to protect them. How do the parents and ministry condone this? Their children are the ones discriminated against and injured. There must be some way to change this. Professor Dumbledore, why are you ignoring me? Professor Dumbledore, sir, please stop. We have to discuss this. Thank you to all those who have finished watching our video going over the frankly implicit but not really stated rules of teachers at Hogwarts. This video is mainly for people who are reading the series for the first time or reading it for classes, just to point out how ridiculous some of the things that teachers at Hogwarts are allowed to get away with compared to what they'd actually be allowed to do in real life. We were just trying to emphasize with this how teachers at Hogwarts can be violent, can act violently towards students, and not really have any repercussions involved. So, thank you again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.